my sister said, her granddaughter said to her, how do you know when you find the right guy? And she said, you just know it. And I think that's how I would describe my vocation. I just knew it. And it stayed throughout my grade school years, high school years. When I was in high school, my mother died. I thought I wasn't going to be able to enter the convent. But my dad said, go. And that's the story of what inspired me to be a nun, was the example of the sisters. And I think the love of God that they instilled within me and my family also. So you want the next oldest?
Yes.
I wondered if that is.
My baptismal name is Sister Joanne Depway, but I'm basically known as Joe, and that's because my family, they said to me when I was going to become a sister, well, Mom, what are we going to call her now? And she said, well, what do you call her? And they said, Joe. Well, then we'll just call her Sister Joe. And so I have been Sister Joe for people who really know me, and all the sisters around here call me Sister Joe. People work here in that. But, and that's it. I mean, then I went to Brazil and we had to change names because of the government, and I became Julia. But when I came back to this, and then I was going to go back to my regular name, Joe, Joanne. And there were going to be 3 of us in the house in Brazil with the same name. And we said, no, this isn't going to work. So I said, I'm just going to go back to my regular name. And so that's how I ended up being Joe. And so that's where I am right now with that. Now, how did I discover, well, I don't know, to be a sister? When I was in the 2nd grade, a priest came to our parish, and he said that he wanted everybody there to think seriously about, when we grow up, who is going to be the ones to do what the sisters are doing today. That meant when I was in the 2nd grade, he's asking us the question, when we grow up, who's going to do it? And I thought, oh, now that kind of stuck with me, but it didn't really say I'm going to be the one to do it. But it was actually when I made my retreat in high school, and we were juniors. And I believe at that retreat, that whole thing of the little girl came back to me. And I said, I believe, even though I had friends and like many of us that are on this screen today, were dating and that, but that came back to me again. And is that what God is asking me? And that's when I went home and I said something to my mom and dad, and they said, we never told your brothers and sisters who they could marry, who they couldn't marry. And so we're going to say to you too, if that's what you want to do, then we give you support. And so anyway, then that's when Brazil was opening up a mission, and we had to write letters and that to see if we would, in order to go to Brazil. And at that time, we had to get our parents' permission because we were basically not a missionary order. And so, and they respected our parents in that. So I said something, I had them, asked them to come to the summit where I was teaching. And I asked them to come, and because I had something I had to ask them. Well, my 2 brother-in-laws said, this must really be something. We're all going. So they all came down to hear what I had to say to Mom and Dad. And I said I wanted to tell them that I would like to go to Brazil as a missionary. And my brother-in-law said he knew they exported nuts from Brazil, but he didn't know they imported them. And so everybody kind of laughed, and that eased the whole thing. So that's where I was, and I spent most of my religious life from then on in Brazil. And we would come home for visits, and that's where I got to know some of the other ones that you can see here. Because I really did not know Joan Crim, and except they were sisters, but I really did know them. So in the end, that's my story. I spent most of my religious life in Brazil.
I'm Judy Clemens, known as Judy Clemens here in the States, but as Joe explained, we had religious names, sisters have aliases. And so in Brazil, I was Carolina. Just a sidebar about the three of us, in case Katie didn't tell you, we are three privileged women who lived with Dorothy. We all lived together in the 60s. Joe arrived in Brazil in 62. Joan and Dot arrived in 66, and I arrived in 68. Joe didn't tell you, because I'm going to tell you that I'm also a Daytonian, like Joan, but Joe is from Hamilton and very proud of it, and we are proud of it too. For me, I had Sisters of Notre Dame all through grade school and high school. And in those days, of course, there was no internet or anything. And I wasn't terribly, I suppose, adventuresome about finding out about other religious orders. The only thing that I knew when I decided, imagine, when God really woke me up, that I did want to work with impoverished people. And so my first idea about religious life was to enter with the Glen Mary sisters, because I knew of the poverty in Appalachia, etc. But a wonderful sister of Notre Dame who believed in me said, well, why don't you enter with us? I think you can do what you want to do. And so I also, like the others, we volunteered for Brazil. And so I was asked to go in 1968. So that's the three of us, and our really big connection. Joan, the biggest connection, being Dot's best friend, and Joe and me being able to live with Dot and to know her well.
To add on to the, how did you get to Brazil? My mother had died when I was 14, and my dad died in 64. And a little voice inside of me kept saying, well, you don't have parents to worry about. You should volunteer for Brazil. But I loved what I was doing. I was teaching, and at that moment I was in Columbus. And I really had no great desire, to go be a missionary. But this dumb voice kept telling me to volunteer. So I called our provincial superior and I said, this crazy thing is happening. And she said, well, write a letter to the Mother General and tell her how you feel. So I wrote the letter, and I put in the letter that I was no good at languages. I didn't know how to drive a shift car. I loved what I was doing, but I had this crazy voice that kept telling me to go to Brazil. I didn't hear anything for 2 years. And then I got a letter saying, if things haven't changed, you'll be leaving for Brazil in August. And I had volunteered, and Sister Dorothy, who was in Arizona, had volunteered, but we didn't know it. And we ended up on the plane together going down to Brazil. And I loved it. My heart's still there.
For me, how I got to Brazil, I was a Spanish teacher. I was on the first faculty at Carroll High School in Dayton, and then I taught for a year in Columbus. And so I was a Spanish major. I spoke fluent Spanish, but we didn't have any missions. As Joe explained, we're not necessarily a mission order. We're not known as a mission order. But we didn't have any sisters in Spanish-speaking countries. So I said, well, the next best thing is Brazil. And I thank Joe and Joan for all the letters that they wrote back to us, talking about their work and their building of communities. And that's what attracted me to Brazil. Well, we all talked about how we met Dot. How I met Dot. Joe, did you know Dot before you went to Brazil?
No.
Yeah. See, I knew her.
I knew of her name because she was out in Arizona, but I didn't.
I met Dot, two of us who were Spanish-speaking sisters in the early 60s were invited by Dot to come down to Arizona, to go down to Mexico, to work in religious education in this tiny, poverty-stricken little village called Puerto Peñasco. Today, if you went there, it's this huge place on the Gulf of California that has cruise ships, and it's a big tourist trap today. But when we went there in the early 60s, it was a very simple fishing village. And so that's how I met Dot. And one of my favorite stories of this is a typical Dot story. She gives Paula and me one of those old station wagons with the wood on the sides of it, and fills it up with whatevers, and says, now you go straight down here, and then you go over the border, and just go straight, and you'll get there. And so off we went, the two of us, to Puerto Peñasco. But what I loved about Dot was when we got back from this summer there, she insisted that she take us to the Grand Canyon. She wanted us to see the Grand Canyon. And that for me was her great, great love of God's creation. That was like a little window for me, way, way back. And then we all lived together and had many laughs and learned much about each other in Brazil.
Well, as I said, I knew Dot. We were good friends in high school. I was a year ahead of her. And when I told her that I was coming down to Mount Notre Dame, going to enter the Sisters of Notre Dame, she said to me, well, if you think you're going down there by yourself, you're sadly mistaken. So she entered with me at the end of her junior year in high school. And the funny thing was, she finished her high school at Mount Notre Dame High School here, but insisted on getting her diploma from Julian High School in Dayton. She would not take a diploma from Notre Dame. She had to graduate from Julian. And we were in the novitiate together, got into all kinds of trouble together. She always managed to sneak out, and I got caught. That was not.
Why don't we talk, because I don't know, Katie, how long you you plan this Zoom, but it might be a good idea to take that last question and then we could weave it back to our own like experiences, happy things that we experienced in Brazil. But it's the one that really interests us Sisters of Notre Dame a lot, and that is how do we feel that Dorothy's legacy lives on?
That works. I think this could only be scheduled for 40 minutes because I use the free version of Zoom, and so it won't let you schedule anything past that. So I believe it's 40 minutes.
Okay, so keep us on track, but let Joe and Joan talk first about this whole thing of Dorothy's legacy. You know, today we celebrate 18 years since her martyrdom, and we're quite impassioned with her legacy.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, one of the things that I would always say is that Dot, by her death, she opened our eyes to what was going on in where most of us were living at the time. And her legacy, her fighting for what she believed in, and that she never worried about herself, but was always concerned about the people. And I carry that with me and hope that I could really help other people too, in my own families or in with the girls at Mount Notre Dame or any place, to know that Dot believed in the people and she would do anything to have justice brought forth in any case whatsoever. That's one of the strongest things that I carry with me about Dot.
I think that I go wild when I hear everybody talking about Dot being an environmentalist. And she is an environmentalist. I don't take that away from her. But I always say, why? Dot had such a love of God and God's creation that she was passionate about anything God had created, whether it be an animal or a fish or a plant or a person. She saw the beauty of God in everything. And I think that's something that, particularly today, we need to really think about and carry on when we're actually ruining the beautiful creation God gave us. And her integrity. Dot lived what she taught. And sometimes you'd like to wring her neck. But that integrity has stuck with me and helped me through a lot of things. And for me, that's carrying on her legacy of the love and admiration of God giving us this wonderful creation He gave us. And the integrity we should have to take care of it and to take care of one another.
And elaborating a bit more on that, Joan, we talk a lot about this. Dot was, obviously, she was an activist. But why, again, just like Joan was saying, the Dorothy that we knew had a very deep spirituality. Dorothy had a particular, just as each of us has, a particular relationship with God. And in her understanding of God, and it was something that as it does in each of us, our relationship with God grows as we grow, as we become part of a mission and we respond to that mission. And Dot was so faithful to God's call from the very beginning, and how that evolved in her is something that all of us were touched by. And her tremendous belief in the goodness of people. Joan always says this, Dot could talk to the highest levels of government of Brazil, to congresspersons, to her farm workers. Dot talked to everyone, addressed everyone in the same manner, with this tremendous belief that they could do good. They could do the righteous thing. And it was in that, of course, there were times of great deception in Dorothy. I always tell the story. One time I was in Belém, and she was also in Belém, and she had visited one of these government offices or something. And she came home and she knocked on the door, and I opened the door to her, and she just burst into tears. And she said, "Carol, they just don't care." And me, in one of my cynical moments, I'm going, duh. Because, you work to turn the laws into life for the people. And that was the struggle. But it just so touched me because that was a deep, deep sorrow in her, because she truly believed. She talked to the men who were going to kill her the next day, and tried to talk to them about leaving their work with the landowner and coming to be part of the community where they could have security for their lives and their families and everything. This was the Dorothy whom we knew and so respected.
You mentioned something about her prayer life, and I have to share this right now before I forget it. She had a terrible back problem. So whenever she would come to Belém, she slept in my bed, and I went into a hammock, into a hedge. What do we call them? Hammocks. And so I came this morning, and she was sitting up in the bed, leaning against the wall. If you can visualize this, with the Bible open in her lap. And I walked in, and I said, "Oh," and she said, "Julia, I am praying for God to give me the strength to go on." And I said, "But Dad, why don't you just stay here in Belém for a little bit?" And it's going to be close to Mardi Gras, and people aren't going to go to meetings and that. "Oh no," she said, "I got to get back to Anapu, because we're going to have this big meeting that's going to divide up this government land that was given to us into sections, and that's going to be the job of this meeting, to divide up the land. So I have to go back." And that was my last encounter with God. Her faithfulness to the people. She could have said, "Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'll stay this weekend. They can do that meeting by themselves." But she wanted to be there with them, and she was killed on the way going to that meeting. So when you said about the prayer, anything Dot did, and she had it with the people, and in the film, it shows them all praying together. She had marked anything by prayer. And I think one of you said that about her, and that is very true.
Katie, I'm wondering if those that are with you have any questions. I'm looking at my watch and saying, do they have anything they want to say, or do they have any questions for us?
Sister Dorothy still well known and talked about in Brazil. In other words, as her work continues.
How much time do we get? 10 minutes.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to switch places, okay?
Sure.
Sisters, I know some of you. I'm Father John McQuarrie. I'm the pastor here.
Okay.
But I just wanted to ask, I guess we're up for in 10 minutes, by the way, Katie. Is Sister's work still appreciated in Brazil? Is she still well known there?
Oh my!
Oh my! We just got from the sisters in Brazil with other organizations who work with the people, especially around land rights, and especially the indigenous people, because the former president of Brazil did away with so many of the possibilities for land rights. And now there's a new president. Yeah. And now there's a new president. And so hopefully some of this can be turned around. But this is a manifest that groups did just recently in Brazil in Dorothy's name, especially for the protection of the Yanomami and the other indigenous groups where there's been such terrible devastation, and also for the farm workers, those who the small land farm people. And so yes, but like for us who get these requests, quite frequently from people around the world who want to talk about Dorothy, give people information, find in Dorothy inspiration. Like we're totally amazed at the diverse population that reaches out to us because they're going to talk about Dorothy, or Dorothy has touched them, and it's truly amazing. And the books, the films, the videos. I like, Joan, you should say this part, hon, about the children today and what we need to do now about education, because they don't know Dorothy.
Yeah, I was saying that here, this is another generation. It's 18 years. We need to re-educate in the parishes again. We need to get her story back into the children here in the States. In Brazil, there's no problem. She's known in Brazil. She's loved in Brazil. They have a pilgrimage every year from where she lived to where she was killed.
Wow.
3 days of walking in the forest, and then a big mass and celebration. The sisters that are still there are carrying on her work. I was on a plane once, and a Brazilian was on the plane and came up to me and said, "Oh, you got Dorothy's cross on." She said, "Do you belong to Dorothy's group?" I mean, that's how well known she is in Brazil.
So we're no longer Sisters of Notre Dame, we're Sisters of Dorothy.
We may have some other questions. Thank you, sisters. Anybody else? Sisters, one of the questions is what still needs to be done. You were already saying some things about the education of the children, and how can we help on the local level?
I think another thing that is so fortuitous in our world right now is the wonderful leadership of Pope Francis and loudness and to try to make a difference.
One of the things we have done is formed a committee. We call it our Dorothy Stang Project, and we're looking at how we can become more environmentally conscious of what we do and what we use. We're looking at the plastics we use. We're looking at the type of heating we have. We're looking at recycling. And those are things that parishes and families can do also. Because we need to act, and we need to act now to save this earth.
Thank you, sisters. Yeah, we as Deacon Norm here could tell you, we are a Laudato Si parish, so we've been conscious of some of that. There's always lots of work to do.
Well, Norm's been a real support all these years.
Yes, amen. Any other questions? We're down about 5 minutes.
Could I give one
Yes.
last thing? I'm looking for people to replace us.
Amen.
So some of you people out there in that audience, be thinking about whether God's talking to you or not about becoming a religious.
Thank you, sister. That's a prayer.
You
That's a
can
prayer.
you can see that we're none the worse for our wear, right?
I'm
That we've had great lives.
I'm 92 years old and I'm still here and I'm still happy.
Well, thank you, sisters. I do want to say that we did get copies of the manifestos. And so we have copies and we have passed them out to everybody. So we did get those letters, and I don't think everybody's had a chance to read them just yet. But we do have both the letter from the women and the actual manifesto itself. So we will definitely be talking about that and spreading it around, our parish family. It was wonderful to meet all of you. And this has really touched probably not only my heart, but the whole room. And it is just so great we got to connect today. And I really hope we get a chance to regularly continue this relationship.
Right.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank
you so much, Katie.
for doing all you did to
Yes,
help this.
we
And
feel very
when-
privileged.
And tell Norm I send him a big hug. There he is.
Oh,
Hey,
is that
that's
detail?
Norm.
Oh, great, great.
That's
Katie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will be in touch with you soon.
Great, great. A big hug to everybody.
yes.
Great hug. Love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Lee, don't you go up there and something. Come on.